Hi, everybody, and welcome back to 16-Minute Church. My name is Mike. A couple of lines from Jesus' own words to get us started. Remain in me, and I in you. Just as a branch is unable to produce fruit by itself unless it remains in the vine, neither can you unless you remain in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches.
Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet, sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mount I'm fixed upon it, mount of thy redeeming love.
One of the things we're doing in 16-Minute Church is we're following one of the versions of Jesus' life as the one that's told by Mark. And today we're still quite near the beginning. We're at chapter 2. And I'm going to skip the first part of chapter 2, which is kind of an interesting story because Jesus generates some controversy, not just by healing somebody, but also by forgiving his sins. So I take care of that in a longer talk that I gave to my church, and you might like to take a look at it. I will leave a link to that video down below. So beginning verse 18, chapter 2. Now that's John the Baptist, John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, and some people came to Jesus. How is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees are fasting, but yours are not? So there's different groups at play here, the disciples of John the Baptist and also the followers of the Pharisees, which were very strict Jewish teachers of the law. Now, they would fast, and that is that they would abstain from eating food for a period of time. Now, it's not something that you would do for pleasure because, as we all know, when we go without food, we quickly, within just a few hours, begin to feel hungry and headachy. So, fasting is not the kind of thing that most modern people aspire to do. We seek to get rid of hunger and poverty and to do away with suffering. So fasting seems to be the exact opposite of what we would typically want to do. Nevertheless, in many of the stories of God's people in the Old Testament, they fast, and this practice is what devout and serious-minded people would do at the time of Jesus also. Why? Well, let's hear Jesus' response to the criticism, that his disciples are not fasting, and see if we can figure that out. So Jesus answered his critics. He answered, "How can the guests of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them? They cannot, so long as they have him with them. But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and then on that day they will fast." Why did people fast? Well, in the Old Testament, people fasted during times of mourning or in times when disaster seemed just around the corner, or in times of struggle, or in times when they realized that God was displeased with them and that they needed to change their ways. These times of fasting were in part an acknowledgement that something is seriously wrong and that it is inappropriate to enjoy foods as if everything is normal because life in the world is out of kilter. It's a way of saying to God something like, I know I've done wrong, or God, your people are suffering, or we are in serious trouble, and God, you are our help. And a good clue to this understanding of fasting, it appears in 2 Samuel chapter 11, part of the Old Testament. There, a military leader named Uriah the Hittite is home on leave while his army is fighting, and he says, "How could I go to my house to eat and to drink and make love to my wife? As surely as I live, I will not do such a thing." So Uriah did not think that it was appropriate to carry on as if everything was normal. Fasting is therefore in the Old Testament an acknowledgement that things are very wrong. It is associated with prayers for God to act. God, we're in dire straits. Help us here. Now, getting back to the comment that Jesus makes, it seems that he's saying that this time, at that particular time, it would have been inappropriate for his disciples to fast. The bridegroom is at the wedding party. Jesus, of course. It's time to celebrate. The salvation of God is here. The answer to our prayers as the nation of God's people is right here among us. It's time to celebrate. Later on, when Jesus retreats from the scene, difficulties will arise. Then it will be appropriate to fast again. Then, maybe anticipating further questions or hearing them, Jesus goes a little further. His intention is to calm any misgivings that his listeners still might have about fasting, about not fasting. And this is what he says. He says, "No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. Otherwise, the new piece will pull away from the old, making the tear even worse. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine will burst the skins. Both the wine and the wineskins will be ruined. No, people pour new wine into new wineskins." Now, we can probably go online and get a more detailed explanation as to the process of new unshrunk cloth separating from old, already shrunk cloth. And likewise, you could find out how new wine in old wineskins is a bad idea. But even though you and I may not have to worry about those kinds of things in the modern world, we get the message. Jesus has come with something new for the Jewish people. You can't carry on as if nothing has to change. Using old cloth to repair what's new, forget it. Go with the new and leave the old cloth behind. Jesus has come with new wine for the people. Forget about putting it into old wineskins. Similarly, in the next passage, the next section, Jesus again encourages people to put aside their old religious habits. And here's how this passage continues. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to Jesus, "Look, why are they doing what's unlawful on the Sabbath?" The Jewish holy day of the week was the Sabbath, Saturday. Now in Jesus' time, the teachers of the law insisted that people could walk only a certain distance on the Sabbath. Anything further would be considered work. On the Sabbath, as it says in the Old Testament, no one may work. It was a day of rest. Those teachers of the law saw the disciples of Jesus picking heads of grain from the grain in a field as they walked along and eating the grain. "Hey," they said, "not allowed. That's work." It was as if the people were required to serve the rules, and the rules were not required to serve and help the people. Hyper concern with rules, nitpicking, that did not help anyone. And so Jesus responds. He answers, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for the priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions." And then he said to them, Jesus said to his critics, "The Sabbath was made for people, not people for the Sabbath. And so the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Well, there's a couple things I need to unpack there. In his comments about King David in the Old Testament, Jesus points out that apparently David broke some of the Jewish rules about eating food that had been consecrated, bread that had been set aside for the priests of his time. If David could break rules when his companions were truly hungry, couldn't other leaders do so also? Jesus is not, I think, encouraging people to live lawlessly, but to exercise some sound judgment. Complaining that his disciples were eating grain as they walked through a field would be like complaining that King David allowed his hungry men to eat when they were out there risking their lives for the people, even if that meant breaking a rule. Exercise sound judgment, people, about how you apply the laws of Moses. This is what Jesus, I think, in effect, is saying. Now, one last thing to clinch this passage. Jesus claims that he is in charge of the Sabbath. We saw last week that Jesus identifies himself as the Son of Man, and now he says the Son of Man is Lord, the Lord of the Sabbath is here, the Son of Man is in charge of the Sabbath. So you nitpickers about Sabbath rules, lighten up. The Lord of the Sabbath, the man of the hour, the ruler of his people is among you. Celebrate. Something new and wonderful is afoot. Quit whining and join the party. We're also going to keep moving along through another section of the Bible called the Sermon on the Mount. It's found in Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. And you might notice that I am trying to follow sequentially large chunks of the Bible. And in doing that, I'm hoping that I will give you a sound way of interpreting the Bible, of understanding it, and seeing what it meant then when it was written, and seeing what it means now, which, of course, is the truly important thing. One reason for paying attention is that Matthew, the writer of this part, recalls Jesus speaking these rules from a mountain. Now, you can probably go online and learn if it is possible to identify the exact location of this mountain or large hill that Matthew is recalling, but the exact location is not important. If it were important, I think Matthew would have included it. But the point is that Jesus is on a mountain or a considerable hill giving instructions. Now, can you think of any other part of the Bible, any other Bible story where a key figure is on a mountain giving rules to live by? If you said Moses on Mount Sinai, you would be correct. Moses received from God the laws that the Israelite people were to live by. He spoke them to the people about 1,500 years, I think, before Jesus. And similarly, Jesus, like a new Moses, is on a high place revealing to the people the word of God for them to live by, receiving these instructions from God, just as Moses received instructions from God, and then giving them, speaking them to the people. Let's go to rule number 1. Jesus says, "You've heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.' But I tell you that anyone who's angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. And again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, 'Raka,' is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, 'You fool,' will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, and then come and offer your gift." So a few comments that I hope will be helpful. First, you might have noticed that Jesus begins by quoting from the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are the very first, the most important of all the commands that Moses transmitted to the people at Mount Sinai. "You shall not murder" is number 6. And Jesus says, in effect, yes, terrific, a supremely important command. But Jesus doesn't leave it at that. He encourages us to consider that nursing anger against people in our hearts, spewing out verbal hatred, raka was apparently a word of insult in Jesus' time, or using the word fool, or insulting people, spewing out verbal hatred against someone with our mouths. These kinds of things are cut from the same evil cloth as the physical act of murder. Any of it can land you in danger of judgment, in charges being laid in a court case, or can land you in the fire of hell, Jesus says. And by the way, please be careful how you read that expression, fire of hell. This expression is a version of the original, the fire of Gehenna, which is the garbage pit of Jerusalem, where fire burnt all the time. Now, in other words, we should not think that we are off the hook regarding the command against murder simply because we haven't killed anyone. Murder begins in the heart, and frequently it migrates to the mouth, hostile words, and then when all that has matured, it becomes an act of killing. And you can learn this from any detective show or police documentary. Each week I work with people who are in jail, and I am aware that crossing the line to actual killing is something that is real, and maybe someone viewing this video has killed. Is there forgiveness from God for that? I'm sometimes asked. Yes, absolutely. That's one of the reasons Jesus came. But just to continue on with Jesus' words, he does end his comment on a positive note. This is how we should live. And I'm kind of using my own words, but see if it's helpful. Live peaceably with your neighbors at all times. As an illustration, if you are on your way to church with a big financial contribution to make to the church, and on your way you remember that there's an issue between you and someone else in the church, first reprogram your Google Map app and drive to the house of the other person. Make things right between the two of you. Now that may be kind of an extreme example, but the meaning is clear. Live at peace with your neighbors. If everyone lived this way, our jails would be empty and our wars would be over. Living at peace with your neighbor is how we fulfill the law against murder.
Jesus sought me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God. He to rescue me from danger interposed his precious blood.
Well, thanks again so much for being part of 16 Minute Church. Please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet, and please don't hesitate to leave a comment. I hope the rest of your week goes great. May God bless you. Bye-bye for now, and I'll see you next time.
Oh, to grace, how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy goodness like a fetter bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it for thy courts above.